Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's Cablecast Post Agenda on mental health initiatives for Wednesday, September 25th. I am Councilperson Bob Sharland and I'm chairing this post agenda. I'm joined with Councilwoman Warwick and Councilman Wilson here in Pittsburgh. I think that it's the perfect time for us to have this conversation about mental health initiatives, as September is Suicide Prevention Month, not Suicide Awareness Month, Suicide Prevention Month. And this year we were able to recognize Suicide Prevention Month in the city of Pittsburgh for the first time that we've done that. And I thought it was important from our office's perspective that we didn't just give you guys a proclamation and do a press conference, but actually do a conversation with folks that are leading in the mental health field about what we can do to help you and support your initiatives here in the city as you're helping our constituents and making sure that that everybody can live a full and happy life here. So if we can do some introductions, I think we'll go from Julius down, and we'll do introductions and then talk a little bit about the initiatives that you're working on, and then we'll open it up to conversations from members. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, the microphone is here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julius Boatwright. I am the founder and managing director with Still Smiling, and we focus on all things Black mental health for residents here in the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County.
Hi, my name is Doug Bishop. I serve as treasurer on the executive board of directors of the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
Good afternoon. My name's Courtney Abegunde. I'm the operations director for Still Smiling. I work with Julius Boatwright.
Good afternoon. My name's Todd Wysong, co-founder with my wife Elisa of the Positive Painting Project, also the Katie Wysong Art for Hope initiative, and a couple other events like that. We deal with combining art with mental health awareness and suicide prevention.
Good afternoon. I'm the operations manager of Artist Talk Mental Health. I support our founder, Sydney Davis. We also collaborate artists with mental health resources as well as mental health activities to keep their practice going and keep their mental health aware.
There we go. Thank you, for introductions here. I think what I would like to do next is if we can maybe go down and give a brief history of your organizations and what you're working on, and if anyone else wants to jump in, it doesn't have to be rigid. It can be kind of a conversation there, if that's okay.
I guess I'm first. So we have two core programs at Still Smiling. One is called Beams to Bridges. It is a mental health workforce development program where we work with Black residents throughout Allegheny County and the city, and they go through a 6-month curriculum, and they essentially learn how to support their own mental health needs and the mental health needs of their neighbors. And at the end of that 6-month program, they are what we call community mental health advocates. So folks don't necessarily have to work in the mental health field. We have folks that work in all different sectors and areas, folks that work in manual labor positions. Some folks do work in the social service space. Other folks are homemakers and they're either underemployed or unemployed. Our goal is to really just get them the skills, the competencies and confidence to be community mental health advocates. And when folks go through that program, they are compensated, they receive a stipend. We have emergency financial assistance for those folks, and they leave that program just being a lot more confident in terms of mental health and serving the needs of folks in their communities. We have another program that's called Still Healing, and that program has 3 different pathways to support. We help folks with financial assistance if they don't have insurance or they don't have the financial ability to pay for mental health treatment. We also have peer support groups for community members. So they come together and they just get support from areas related to grief, family challenges that they may be going through, or any other mental health areas of opportunity that they need support with. And we also do wellness navigation as well. So folks may have difficulty navigating resources. We know the system and all of its barriers, so we make ourselves available to help folks access those supports and just sort of serve as a wayfinder.
Again, my name is Doug Bishop. I am here representing the Western Pennsylvania chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We'll abbreviate that to AFSP, makes the conversation easier. We are in charge of 25 counties in Western Pennsylvania, but our largest footprint is right here in Allegheny County and in Pittsburgh. AFSP is a national organization with chapters in all 50 states, including Puerto Rico. There are currently about 72 chapters, I believe. The big four pillars of what we do is we are the #1 provider of research grants privately in the U.S., second behind federal government. And we have funded many, many researchers right here in Pittsburgh at UPMC. So I know I've seen some of those projects. They're quite fascinating. We also provide a lot of educational programs. We will provide those at no charge to literally anybody, any place, at any time, if the need's there. We also do a lot of advocacy. We are regularly in Harrisburg and in Washington, D.C., trying to get some laws changed. One of the largest changes we've had success with lately is we were big supporters of creating the new 988 number, which is now for mental health. And we also have a big presence in what we call loss and healing for those that have lost someone to suicide. The big event we do here in Pittsburgh, and it's done actually everywhere across the country, on the Saturday before Thanksgiving, we have a day that is just for those that have lost somebody to suicide. And we generally have it the Saturday before Thanksgiving every year. And it's a big day of hope for people that have lost somebody.
My name's Todd Wysong. My wife and I run the Katie Wysong Art for Hope initiative, which funds. We have a scholarship program that provides funding for local teens to attend classes at local art studios with local artists. We also we're part of the installation of a project called the Telephone of the Wind in Millvale. And our most well-known project that we do is called the Positive Painting Project, where we work with schools and communities and community groups, and basically ask people to paint a background on a canvas and provide all the supplies and everything they need, because everyone can paint a background, and no matter what your art level is. We then take those paintings that they make and we screen print on them one of 6 different messages for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And then paintings go back to the schools or the community groups, wherever they came from. We've worked with a handful of different, I'd say 2 or 3 different ones in Pittsburgh Public School, but overall in the Western PA area, we've done installations in 47 schools in over 40 districts now. The Pittsburgh Public ones are Alderdice High School, and we worked at Dilworth Elementary, and not to get ahead of myself, but that would be one of the wonderful things to be able to discuss today, would be getting a little more introduction into the Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Hi, my name's Sydney Davis. I'm the founder of Artist Talk. This is Malik Potter. He's my partner in crime. Artist Talk Mental Health is an initiative that supports Black artists in the Pittsburgh region, and past that, we've had events in other cities as well. But our initiative is to create safe spaces for artists. We do that by hosting programming such as Therapeutic Spaces cohort, where we do professional development, artistry development, and we do free group therapy. A lot of Black artists in the city don't have access to a lot of mental health resources. There's not a lot of program that's really dialed in specifically on the Black community and artists. So we teach them coping skills and how to be sustainable, but in a very holistic way. We also have bigger showcases where artists get up and talk about their artwork, and then we have a therapist come in and talk with the community about different mental health topics that are specific to the Black community. And we also host an event that's called Black Therapy 101, a series where we find Black therapists in the community to address certain needs or conversations that people want to know about therapy. What does that look like? How do you find a therapist? How do you break up with your therapist? And we've partnered with Still Smiling and other organizations that are highlighting those topics and just trying to serve our community with knowledge on that.
So I'll ask just a question or two, and then we'll move on to members if that's okay. My first question I have for you is in any way that you can define it. I don't know if you can define it qualitatively or quantitatively. What is the state of mental health in this region? Is there any way that you can give a broad sense of where are we right now? Anyone willing to take a shot at that?
I'll quote some statistics. That's the best way to say.
Yeah.
This is United States, but it's not too much different in Pennsylvania. I don't have specifically Pittsburgh statistics, but I think you'll see where I'm going here. Suicide's the third leading cause of death for ages 10 to 19. That's staggering.
10 to 19?
10 to 19. It's the second leading cause of death from 20 to 34. And it's the fourth leading cause of death in ages 35 to 44. This is from the CDC, who we now all know who that is. I would also say that there's somewhat of a underlying issue when you look at the causes. The number one methodology for suicides is firearms. And the statistic there is that 53% of all suicides were firearms. Also, kind of unknown is that 54% of firearm deaths were suicides. So there's more suicides from firearms than there are homicides. %90 of those who died by suicide had a diagnosable mental condition at the time of their death. And 46% of Americans ages 18 plus living with a mental health condition had received treatment in the past year. And 72% of communities in the United States do not have enough mental health providers to serve residents in 2021. %10 of adults in America have thought about suicide. 1.2 million Americans have attempted suicide. And 54% of Americans have been affected by suicide in some way.
And you say those numbers mirror Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania is very close to those kind of numbers. I can give you some real quick ones for PA. The causes of death are third, and fifth in the first three categories that I quoted before. So it's not drastically different.
Yeah.
So I think I look at this and look at the youth, and it really concerns me.
Yeah.
And access to firearms concerns me too.
Which actually I can expand on a little bit as far as with the youth. According to the CDC, it's the second leading cause of death between those between 10 and 24 years old as well. And nearly 1 in 4 high school students admit to have had seriously considered suicide within the last year, according to the CDC.
And just because I know this is another focus here, can we do we have any data or anything around where mental health is in terms of communities of color?
Well, I would say I don't have the the explicit data, but when I think about the amount of Black residents in the city, so it's approximately 70,000 Black residents in the city, and I would just like to highlight that what we're seeing and what we're hearing and what we're experiencing from Black residents around mental health is a lot of hope, a lot of desire, a lot of willingness to heal, to do the training programs, to get the support, to get the help, to help their neighbors. So even with these like very alarming and heartbreaking and staggering statistics, there is hope, and there are folks that want to get their hands dirty and actually do the work, and they don't want to become necessarily licensed mental health professionals, but there are grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors who say, if you give me the tools, if you give me the resources, I will do what it takes to support my mental health and the mental health of my neighbors and my communities. And we're hearing that specifically from Black residents.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Courtney Abegunde from Still Smiling again. I also wanted to add a statistic that something like 1 in 5 people in our country will be diagnosed with a mental health condition at some point in time in their lifetime. I believe that comes from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. But even beyond that, we were asking about prevalence of suicide, prevalence of mental illness. But I also want to remind us that we all have mental health. We all have periods of stress, periods of time where we can't cope with what's going on around us, and times where we may need to reach out for help related to our mental health specifically, whether we're diagnosed or we commit self-harm or something like that. So while we sometimes talk about mental illness specifically, I think it's also helpful to zoom out and recognize that this could occur with anyone. And also all of us are impacted at some point in time in our life. And then to zoom out a little bit more, like my colleague Julius was just saying, that when we think about interventions or what we can do to support communities related to mental health and mental illness, there's an entire spectrum and ecosystem that we think of as far as mental health helpers, and that can include our treatment professionals, our therapists, our social workers, our psychiatrists, but it can also include our community members who are skilled and knowledgeable about mental health, whether that's because they have lived experience of navigating a mental illness or troubles themselves, or if they're a community health worker or a teacher or a family or a neighbor who's there to be present and supportive of someone. So we want to highlight the people who experience and who are the most severely impacted by mental health troubles, like folks who are contemplating suicide and like folks who experience mental illness. But we also want to realize that all of us have a mental health to take care of and could benefit from more things like education and support.
I would just add to both of these comments that we just heard. One of the things we want to really try to do is get rid of the stigma about not talking about mental health and actually talk about it, because it is a significant problem. And we need to continue to talk about it, because talking about it will save some lives. And that's what we have to do.
And I want to acknowledge that we're joined by my colleague, Councilman Mosley here. But the last question I'll have, and then I'll give it to members here, is, what can we as the city do to help? We were briefly talking about stigma reduction and getting into schools. What are other avenues that we as city council can advocate for you or can help you moving forward? And I know this isn't I'm not looking for a perfect answer here. I'm just trying to, get the gears turning. So any ideas that you might have would be helpful for us.
So my name is Malik Potter with Artist Talk Mental Health again, and I would say that the city's been doing a really good job as of late. I would piggyback on Julius is saying in the sense of hope. The men's mental health awareness event the city did was amazing. Mayor Gainey and Julius bringing in the Just Heal Bro team and having men, excuse me, come together and talk about their mental health in a safe space where it's all men and we could really discuss these things has been eye-opening and just brought hope. I would say going forward is to centralize these things and create a hub, create a way that all of these organizations can come together and speak on the resources, speak on the things we need to focus on. There's organizations like Catapult Pittsburgh who's focusing on financial wellness and talking about the effect of the economy and finances on mental health. The city kind of coming in and attacking that. You know, let's talk about what the economics of the city looks like and how we can connect that to the residents and make sure that their mental health is being taken care of within that. So something that I actually proposed to the collaboration, I will call this already, but is to create a collaboration. PSPC would be Pittsburgh Suicide Prevention Collaboration. And it's having organizations like ours as well as organizations like NAMI, Catapult Pittsburgh, 8099 I know is doing things around suicide prevention and allowing us not only to use September as a month to have events and fundraisers and to support people who have been affected and support mental wellness, but also come together with maybe a hub of resources. If the city could help with some of their resources on creating a website that the city backs, or however we can put the city stamp on saying these are the organizations we trust to help you all, and having us all have the alignment of resources that we're providing and activities. You know, one thing a friend of mine said to me recently is nobody wants to hear anything unless there's some fun attached to it. So one way to let people know that they matter and we care about them is to have fun with them. So just coming up with ways that we could use September specifically as the prevention month to create these activities, but as well as throughout the year having a hub people can go to and say, oh, hey, go to this website. I know they can help.
Sydney Davis from Artist Talk. I'm going to piggyback off of my partner in crime here. I think just having some support from you guys and an open line of communication. I think our needs, we're very tapped into our communities. We're very diligent with the work that we do with them, and we understand when they're telling us their needs. And it might not always translate over to other people, but we know their needs. So having support for those things. When I talk to artists, a lot of the times they're not always coming to me asking for a therapist. They're trying to figure out how they could have access to food or housing. Like, the basic needs need to be covered before we can even start to heal or progress in any other way. So we have the resources, we're making the connections, we're building the support systems, just being able to lean in when we need things and having that line of communication open, because maybe it's a venue one day, but maybe it's resources for food to support a certain community the other day, or just access to different programming and resources to share with our community. So having that line of communication to be open and to be current with what we're needing in that moment is something that I think we need support with. I feel like we're doing the work and we're doing it well. We just need some love and some backing up and enforcing of this is important and we got your back doing this, and being there in those moments where we do need to call on somebody to answer.
One of the things I want to mention is the fact with September being Suicide Prevention Month, it's also the first month that a lot of our students are going back to school, and it's an extremely busy time for teachers. And they reach out a lot, saying, "Well, we wanted to do something in September, but we didn't have time, or we weren't able to do that." And I mean, not that there's any reason they can't participate in it later, but with it being September being Suicide Prevention Month, it's we definitely get a lot more requests during that time. It comes down to budgeting for a lot of the schools. They have to see if they can do it. A lot of it is what the AFSP spoke on. There is a stigma, and there's still a stigma out there that parents worry that talking about suicide, talking about mental health will somehow infect them or make things worse, whereas, they're talking about it anyway. And what they are is afraid to tell someone. They're afraid to tell someone, I'm not okay, and they're afraid to talk about it and get the help that they need. And if we can somehow reach these students when they're younger, they eventually grow up, and we move towards a society where people are less afraid of fear and judgment, of dealing with mental health difficulties. The example we always give is if you were at your doctor or your dentist that day, you'd have no problem telling someone that. But if you were at your therapist or your psychiatrist earlier that day, you'd probably still say, I was at the doctor or the dentist. And that right there is part of that stigma, people being afraid of the judgment and spreading the word that you just said is spreading the word that everyone deals with mental health struggles at one time or another in their life. They're all touched by it one way or another. Everyone has a story. What I found in our own journeys is that opening up and telling someone your story tells them that you're someone they can talk to as well. And that's just a big hurdle, I think, to get over with a lot of people. And the only way to do that is more outreach and just spreading the word.
Hi, Doug Bishop from AFSP. I just wanted to add on to what Todd just said, specifically first on his comment on whether you ask someone if they're considering suicide, that you might be pushing them into that thought process. There's been many studies on it, and that is not what happens. It actually opens up the conversation, and you can then have that opportunity to talk about it. And so it is very important to talk. Erasing the stigma is, I think, a huge priority. And I think by having opportunities like this to talk about it, to have gatherings of all the organizations together, to give people the resources. I love the idea of a website for people to be able to find some resources right here in Pittsburgh. I think that's a terrific idea. And I think adding fun is spot on as well. It is a very serious topic. Personally, I don't like the term mental health. I think it's just health. We should just not separate the two, but we have already been doing that forever. But I'd like to see that change. But I think having music pulls people together. I think to have maybe a large music event with some city support on that, and having multiple organizations there with all of their wares, if you will, I think, and opportunities for people to talk. I think something like that would be interesting too.
Thank you. Councilman Warwick?
Yeah, thank you all for being here. I appreciate you taking the time today. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess I had, just because, obviously it's been, over the month there have been lots of news stories and whatnot, and so I guess I wanted to sort of ask you about a few things that I've, that we've all been seeing in the news. Just today, actually, there was a story on UPMC's Western Psych in Oakland, and just the fact that they are understaffed. Nurses seeing as many as 14 patients. 14 patients to one nurse at night. One nurse reporting up to 27 patients. And that only a third of the beds, that a third of the beds are closed due to the understaffing. That's obviously, the largest behavioral health facility in the area. I know Councilwoman Strasburger was involved in an action around that with the nurses. So do you have any thoughts about that, of folks getting turned away?
Again, turning back to statistics that I had earlier.
Yeah.
Again, this is Pennsylvania, it's not just Pittsburgh, but 62% of communities did not have enough mental health providers to serve its residents in 2023. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's a problem.
Yeah.
62%?
62%, yes.
And another thing, and I know that the Biden, and I'll let everyone else, but just because it's sort of in tandem with specifically Western Psych, just in general, these like ghost networks, right? That they're, you know, if you have your healthcare provider and then they list, you know, you're looking for mental health providers and then they have a whole list, but none of them are taking patients or they aren't in network or, you know, whatever. So
I think a lot of the community that I serve, they don't even make it to that network. They don't have insurance. So that's a barrier in itself, but some people don't even make it to that step. I think it's those littler or more ground level things of like resources for housing, for food, and taking care, which a lot of these community and organizations, we're starting at that level with the community. And I think, yes, having some type of like festival, something where we're seeing all of these communities kind of come together and bridge the gap and being an example for our youth, but also for our young adults, just to show them, because some older generations, that, you know, that stigma is still very hard. So breaking that together, I'm going to be moderating a panel with different art therapists around the city, and one of the questions was, how do we bridge the gap in between all of these communities? But what I find from talking with all of the therapists in all the different communities is we're dealing with the same things. And I really think that walking that walk and showing an example of what we can do when we come together as a city, but also as like elders or our youth, and putting that power and confidence into people's hands by being a part of something bigger than themselves, is going to inspire them to seek out those resources, and we'll be there to answer. But just having that support, there's, you know, Allegheny County declared a mental health crisis. So we're there. It's just a matter of how do we sustain our communities and do the best we can as these smaller organizations with our targets and our demographics. So yeah, it's definitely a problem, but I think right now we can't bring people in to solve the number problem. So we have to solve the more human problems and showing people that we see them in the details. And I think we do that by showing up.
Yeah. I think when we talk about the mental health crisis, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And we want the systems and the institutions and the resources that are at the table to be adequately serving our communities. And so whenever we have questions about, you know, what's going on at our institutions, we should always ask those questions. I also want to move forward what Sydney was talking about the importance of looking at mental health support really as an ecosystem, because hospitals can't resolve everything for us. We're not going to catch up to the lack of therapists in our region in enough time to address this crisis. That's certainly an advocacy point, and something that we should work towards is more capacity within our treatment services and continuum. But what about our community continuum? What about our capacity as neighbors to be good supports to each other, like Sydney was saying? What about these grassroots organizations like Everybody at the Table, who's doing work in collaborations with the institutions that we also want to be holding accountable? How can we all be accountable to nourishing the mental health of the community that we're serving? And so I do appreciate the council for bringing these groups together. I agree that an ongoing conversation and ongoing collaboration is what's needed here. This can't be well, this month happened and so we did this. It has to be an ongoing communication and supporting of each other, much like Sydney was saying earlier.
Great. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would just kind of piggyback on the previous two comments and just add that an invitation for us to reimagine the way mental health care looks in our city, in our county, and really countrywide. You know, we we for so long have leaned on the medical system, and we're going to continue to do that and continue to collaborate with them. How do we think more expansively and more creatively about how we create those bridges and those collaborations with the medical institutions that provide this behavioral health and mental health support? I think that it won't be the solution, but it will most certainly be a huge part of the solution.
I just wanted to make one more comment that, so just kind of the origin of Artist Talk started just a lot of my friends looking for therapists, me looking for a therapist myself, and being put on these 6 and 8 month waiting lists when you feel you're at like a breaking point, or you're kind of drowning in life is very horrific, and that's an understatement. I don't know where you could be like you being in that space mentally and somebody telling you to hold on for 8 more months. So I realized that the cavalry was not coming for me and my community of friends and Black artists. So I thought I was going to raise money for everybody to get a therapist, and very quickly found out that that was not going to happen quickly enough. So we found a therapist, and we brought her to the circles that we were having with my community. And it didn't have to be an individual therapist. It was one person coming in, and really it was the community healing itself. But with that one facilitator, we were able to help and touch so many lives. So that's the support systems that we're building, and not looking for like the city to come in and lead that and do that movement. You're not connected with our communities how we are. And we're trusted leaders and facilitators in the community. I think and the leaders of these spaces, that's the support that we're looking for. And I think that we can impact so many lives like that just from bringing in one therapist and a community and sitting in a room and just having a conversation, and honestly just venting or feeling like we're being seen for one moment in a very busy life when we feel like we don't have these places to go to. Us creating these safe places and these hubs, I think will heal the community a lot more rapidly than filling therapist jobs or nursing jobs. So yeah.
Another issue, since you brought up 988, and I was just yesterday, so County Councilwoman Hallam introduced a resolution to honor Christian Hall and to highlight the need to fully fund 988. So for those who don't know, Christian Hall was having a mental health crisis, and 911 was called, and then he was shot by the state police that answered the call. And this is not something that happens infrequently. This kind of thing happens a lot. So, that is obviously another issue, and I'm glad the resolution passed, with a large majority, 14-1 or whatever. But, so I was wondering your thoughts on that. I mean, again, these are the systems that us in government, if not at city council, but otherwise, and I do think that, as much as we may be making improvements, our police are not equipped to deal with, they are not therapists. They are not equipped to deal with mental health crises. And they're also in their own, especially if they're, weapons or whatnot. And that these crises, at any rate, I'll if anyone has comments about that.
If I can expand on that. Pennsylvania is the only state out of the 50 states that doesn't mandate that we have school counselors. And there's an alarming number of schools that have security officers, but no school psychologist and no school counselor. And to me, it's just to expand on what you were just saying. It's and as we know, the security officers aren't trained to be a teacher, and they're not trained to be a therapist. And these are the kind of things where we can treat the problem at closer to its root.
I just wanted to speak on what is called a crisis care plan. So when we talk about like collective care in the community, there are these micro communities, right, of family members, of friends, of people who know us and have an intimate understanding of how to support us. So what a crisis care plan can do if shared with the right folks and if accessed in an adequate amount of time, it can inform folks within this network of support to say, said person who's having the crisis, I'm going to reach out to them and see how they're doing today. I have a copy of their crisis care plan, so I know, what triggers them. I know times of the day when they may be experiencing a mental health crisis or a mental health challenge. So I'm going to make it my duty to reach out to them and connect with them. Again, it's not the solution, but in these instances, if someone's micro community of care can connect with them, maybe drop by and visit with them in the interim, in that in-between time, maybe they can serve as an intermediary or as a buffer and provide some sort of communication or some sort of support that that ultimately keeps folks healed and keeps them alive.
Yeah, I would agree. I just want to piggyback on the aspect of getting to the youth and touching into the school districts. I actually had an experience recently with the young lady who was killed by the car in Homewood recently, where the city's trauma team came out. And it was just interesting to me to see them interact with the children and do things kind of like what Julius is talking about, where I spoke with one of the trauma team and she's like, yeah, I'm going to check on him next week and the week after, and to continue that engagement with kids that experience something super traumatic. They witnessed this. And I believe even in the sense of what Western Psych's going through, we might be in quicksand right now, but we can point out that quicksand for the kids behind us and show them that there's an opportunity for you to help your peers in the future you might not see right now, and to expose them to organizations like ours to see that, I can have a life or career or even just be an advocate to support my friends growing up healthy. And we talk about generational wealth, but we also need to deal with generational health.
Well, yeah. So I really appreciate this conversation, and I do want to say, what you're talking about. I love this idea of like, sort of training folks in the community. And I know in my district, I have had folks specifically in the Black community reach out to me and say, these kids, especially who are doing like after school programming. That's sort of what this like very community based after school programming. The folks who are doing that have come to me and said, we need help with this. Like, we need, whether it's like even if it's just starting with like a group circle, or like separating the boys and the girls and like talking about, what I mean? Just this kind of, so I am very enthusiastic. I don't know if you work with youth specifically or if it's just with the older folks.
We are able to access the youth through the adults.
Okay.
Yeah, but directly with adults.
Okay. But at any rate, so we'll take contact. I'll get your contact information from Councilman Charlin, because I know that is certainly something that I think the community leaders would be interested in. Who are working with the youth and the seniors and families and whatnot, and because that access, and like you said, even just like the thought of going to therapy, to actually like going to therapy is like not happening at all. So yeah, great. Thank you all for being here. That's it from me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Warwick. I want to acknowledge that Councilperson Strasburger did join us. I am not as effective as a chair as she is, so didn't notice that. So we've been joined by her. Councilman Wilson, I know that you are crushed for time. Councilman Mosley, is it okay if he goes before you? Thank you.
I did walk in before.
Never mind.
He looks way better than me, but thank you for being here. Thank you for putting this together. Thanks for sitting through my jokes sometimes. I wanted to recognize the statistics that you mentioned, because oftentimes in our role we get a lot of complaints about what's happening outside, and then we forget that, for instance, people who are outside dealing with, their own issues, residents see that, they look out their window, they're walking down the street, some of them turn violent, and so then they have interactions with police. We have different teams out there. You mentioned our outreach team they do some pre-engagement stuff, but then also after a traumatic event, especially a shooting or different accidents. But the stats you went over, I imagine they probably are people who are inside and the people who are housed and people that, not that it's not, but I would say there's probably a large, the statistics you mentioned were pretty large. We separated them, so oftentimes it's always interesting. We forget, when we see someone using outside, we're like, oh, we bike past them. I get, complaints from residents. We bike past them, and it's happening all the time inside, whether it's like alcohol or different drugs. And so anyway, I don't know all the reasons. I'm not a health professional, but all the reasons why people are using. But I imagine there's definitely a large intersection. So I appreciate you, working with that community. And I was just really wondering, like, how you do intersect with, or how you are get referrals, or how you work with people. I mean, specifically for a city-funded stuff. So, for instance, like our OCHS, Office of Community Health and Safety, the outreach team that you mentioned, I guess, and then also, under OCHS, there's, you can go on the website, probably you're all familiar with, and there's different programs that they have that are city funded. So do you intersect with any of them? Do you get referrals from them, or is it just, or your referrals come in differently? This isn't a question for anyone specifically, so whoever would like to try and... We've had some funding to help us with educational programs, putting them on for people. And
From the city?
From the county.
Oh, from the county,
Yes.
through DHS?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I believe, I'm 90% sure of that. But they've helped put on some educational programs so that we can get the information out there to teach people more about mental health, signs to look for, things like that.
But like these programs, appreciate that, these programs that we have, I'm just really curious, like we have some co-response now. Like I don't know all the ins and outs of the programs, and once I tried to dive into it a couple years ago, there was just so much to learn about where an individual goes. So are you working with that population that's outside that typically we are getting complaints about?
So you mentioned a few programs ran by the city, and your question, just to reflect back, is if we receive referrals from them or if we work with them in any sort of way.
Yeah.
So Still Smiling does receive referrals from some of the programs that you mentioned, especially the folks doing the violence disruption work,
Okay.
Pre and post. Some of the folks who actually work in those programs are graduates of our Beams to Bridges program, the community mental health education and support program / workforce development that Julius was talking about earlier. So we're really proud of that because they use some of the skills learning about their personal mental health journeys to then go out and coach others using the training from the programs that they work in now. But something else I wanted to add that I think is an opportunity is to consider those folks in the work that they do, which carries a high risk for exposure to trauma, right? These are trauma intervention programs. They're intervening as quick as possible. They're trying to prevent some of these things that can carry a high risk for traumatization of the workers themselves. So something that Still Smiling's thinking about right now is how do we help the helpers? How do we make sure that the folks who are doing this intervention work in our community at all levels, who have this concern for exposure to trauma and violence themselves, how do we make sure that they're emotionally okay to do the things that we're asking of them? And how do we make sure that they're not pouring from an empty cup? So just wanting to lift up that there's opportunities to refer to each other with those programs, but also opportunities for education, programming, and emotional support of those workers as well.
Thanks. And I appreciate that you mentioned the workers, because that was going to be my second question,
which was my understanding is, like you mentioned, people that are working in that space, they not only maybe they have seen or heard or working with someone, or they were on the scene whenever that happened. There was something traumatic that happened, but typically people that work in that space are approached for the position or apply for the position because they do have experience. Could be, they had a former, they were going through something themselves, whether it was, mental health or whether it was, they had substance use disorder as well. And so then, I've heard of, there's a high turnover, and, and there really isn't a good HR program for that, because sorry to giggle, but it's just how I'm kind of trying to talk about it, because it's just like this space that I don't know how you would, if you hire someone who is has used before, and they're the one that you're setting out into field to try and work with the people who are using drugs, then they could have a relapse. They could start doing that again, and then could be against their job, but their whatever the job requirements. Their I can't remember what it's called, but they're not supposed to be shown up to
Avoiding
work
triggers.
using certain drugs, and so then I don't know, you could say that there wasn't the right support because they're put into this environment. Anyway, that's getting really tricky down the road, but I don't want to.
I kind of have an answer for you, though. Or,
I'm interested.
An invitation for how to think about that. So there's lots of people who use their lived experience and their personal experience to also then give back to their communities by being therapists, counselors, doctors, but also the folks that are out here in these very...
You have all the terms. I appreciate it. I'm over here trying to gather it. The lived experience.
Lived experience is the language that we like to use. But you're right. There's a risk of being re-traumatized and exposed to the things that you've experienced before that may have put you in a bad place. Still Smiling hires people with lived experience to support our mental health and emotional support groups. And we do that because people with lived experience have a special understanding of what it's like to go through what folks are going through. And that knowledge is not something that you can learn from a book. And receiving additional training is part of that. Sharing your lived experience. It's not just, I went through this and so now I do this. There's some personal journeying and learning and education that's behind it, but understanding that you're putting yourself in a space that could expose you to some of the stuff that you were trying to avoid is a reality of that type of work. And so that means that because we value the lived experience and the support that the very special support that those folks can offer our communities, we also have to take steps knowing the hazards of your job to give you support to combat and manage that as well. You mentioned that there's a high turnover rate in some of these positions, and I'm really suspicious about what we're doing to support these workers and actually doing what we're asking them to do. And you see this conversation, it's very prevalent in the healthcare space for therapists who might be supporting folks going through trauma, but what we're recognizing here is that it's not just therapists that can experience this level of burnout or this level, we call it re-traumatization. You all in your work, when you're talking to your constituents and hearing the troubles that they're going through, that could expose you to difficult feelings, that are tough to manage, right? I don't know the stressors of what you carry with what people talk to you about, but then I wonder, about your emotional support, right? So the lived experience is very important because it's impactful for our community members to see people who have been through similar things, who look like them, who are from their neighborhoods, who have been successful on their journeys. How can I be like them? What can I learn from them? But at the same time, we have to support those folks to actually be able to do that very, very important work.
just to follow up a little bit, sidetracked a little bit from it, but I think you'll see the relationship in a minute, I hope. I recently was fortunate enough to attend a conference that AFSP put on for those that have long-term survivors of suicide. It's for those folks. So these were generally, their target audience was 7 years or longer. I lost my son to suicide 10 years ago. So I attended this conference, and I think what she was mentioning is how important it is to be with others that are going through something similar. It's really important, because you really don't, unless you're in that same boat, you really don't completely understand. I even think to the point where therapists, and God bless them all, but some of them won't understand this side of a loss without really having experienced it. And I know that's a bold statement, but I think it's pretty close to a fact. And I will also say that this was a long 3-day grief conference, if you will, and I'm normally on the other side of it. And so this was for me to attend, for me as a person, rather than me as a board member. I had to get up and leave the room for about 20 minutes because it was triggering. It was very traumatic. And even at 10 years, there's still triggers. And we did, at the very end of the day, we did breakout sessions where you would go into whether you lost a spouse, a sibling, a child, etc. And I was in the breakout group with about 50 other people that had lost a child. There was a woman that attended, lost her daughter 45 years ago. And she felt it was important to go to this.
Thanks for that.
I would also have a bold statement as far as, I would counter that. I would counter that there's a high turnover rate, I guess, specifically with the people that are leading the work. I think that what I've seen in my community, a lot of the more grassroots and people that are actually in the community, I feel like we are more prone to burnout, but I've seen them sustain themselves. How, I could not tell you. A lot of these organizations have been around for 10 years. Still Smiling's been around for 5 years. Places that have been open longer that are not like maybe bigger as UPMC. But I think for me, in my experience, I know we have our cohort series and we ask a lot of questions in the application about why they're seeking mental health support and why they would like to be part of our program. And it's absolutely traumatizing reading these answers. But I think that gives us a lot of fuel and passion to come back and do the work and sustain ourselves, even in spite of the burnout process. It makes us very resilient because we can connect and we can relate. And to your point, you really couldn't understand unless you went through it. And I've walked in a lot of these artists' shoes. So I completely understand all the statements that they're saying. And if they're not, I could imagine. So I think that really gives us a lot of power and confidence and resiliency to continue and to do the work. Maybe the people that haven't related have a high turnover rate, or maybe the ones that aren't as in the community and are so much a part of that community and that voice. But I would say that from the community leaders that I see now, that they've been very strong in the community and sticking it out, and I'm really proud of them. Like I said, I have no idea how they're doing that exactly, but I've seen a lot of more grassroots organizations and resources be more sustainable and impactful than the bigger ones where they are having those higher turnover rates.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was just someone who was managing a program one time. They were just describing, that. So it could just be one program, but I think it is something that people go through who are working in the space. I did want to ask one specific question about. I'm just going to pick one randomly. Still Smiling. if someone does get a referral, you know, like say, I don't know, say you get a referral, do you have like people on staff who, I don't know, manage the situation when someone calls in? Like how does that actually happen?
So Steel Smiling has a referral line for our Steel Healing program where we accept all manner of community referrals. The phone number for that is 412-390-5545. When you call that number, you'll speak to our program manager. Her name's Robin Sheffy. She'll ask you what's going on, and sometimes when people call that line, they're literally looking for like the name of a program, a phone number, and they're good to go, and it's as simple as that. But sometimes people are looking for additional support. They're looking for someone to be a wayfinder, to help them navigate the system. They want to keep in contact with us. They have continued questions. I gave them a phone number and they called and left a message. They haven't heard back, or they did go and connect to that resource. You know what? It wasn't exactly the fit that I was looking for. I think I need help with something else. And so we're right there, you know, to keep that process going, just depending on, you know, whatever the person needs.
So you consider a provider? Like, do you have therapists on staff?
So we don't have therapists on staff, but we have a network of therapists who we refer to. But folks aren't always looking for that connection to therapy. Sometimes they're looking for peer support, someone with that lived experience we were talking about before, to do ongoing check-ins with them and encourage them about their mental health and their mental health goals. Or they're looking for the financial assistance and support for care because, you know, the therapist that they wanted to go see wasn't in network, or they're looking for a Black therapist, or just for whatever reason they need some sort of financial support for care. And then we can refer them to one of the therapists in our network where we cover the cost of their treatment. That's the financial assistance that Julius mentioned before.
And how are you able to do that?
Sorry?
I thought, did you say you cover the cost of the care sometimes? Mm-hmm. And how are you able to do that? Is that through foundations?
Through a number of different funding support. We're part of the DHS Informal Community Mental Health Support Collaborative. Mm-hmm. So some of those funds contribute to that.
All right, thanks. That was very helpful. Thanks for everyone for coming. And sorry I have to leave early.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And Councilman Mosley?
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here and thank my colleague for chairing. Most of my questions are going to come from my lived experience. You know, I've been very open about the fact that my mother suffered from mental illness the majority of my life before she passed away 9 years ago. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenia when I was a child, and, you know, throughout my adult life when I was her primary caretaker up until her death in 2015. So my first question is around kind of tools, you know, and resources, you know, for children, much like myself 40 years ago, that were in a household with a parent that was struggling, you know, with mental health. What kind of like resources are there out there? You know, I wish, you know, back in the 80s, you know, I would have been aware of like those kind of tools when my mother, you know, was really in the beginning, you know, stages, you know, of her journey, you know, with paranoid schizophrenia. And, you know, it was definitely, you know, a very challenging time, you know, as an elementary school kid. And obviously the stigma, and obviously, you know, we talk about stigmas, you know, in this century, but, you know, at the end of last century, you know, the stigma was even worse. And it was, you know, something that we really kept, you know, within our family. And then there were times, you know, when she had outbursts and such. So, you know, what kind of tools out there exist, you know, for children today that have a parent suffering, you know, from mental illness? Is this for anyone on the panel?
Say something, Court?
So Steel Smiling doesn't currently offer support groups for youth, but that's something that we're currently talking about and hoping to share more about soon. Thank you so much for sharing about your experience and how mental illness has impacted your family. I know that schizophrenia is incredibly impactful to the person experiencing it, as well as the supporters that are around them. I'm really proud of an effort that's actually happening in Pennsylvania called First Episode Psychosis Programs, which are aimed at early intervention for people experiencing any type of psychosis that could be related to schizophrenia. There are 2 programs in Pittsburgh that offer early intervention care for psychosis. They serve youth as young as 14. One is the STEP Clinic out of UPMC Western Psych. The other one is through Wesley Family Services. I can't recall the name of their program. But they target the earliest experiences that folks can have related to that. And they offer peer support, so people with lived experience, again, helping the folks that are in that program. Additionally, some of those programs partner with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, who does support programs. NAMI in their early stages was truly focused on people with serious mental illness, like with schizophrenia. They've been incredibly supportive of doing outreach and education in our communities about psychosis and schizophrenia. NAMI has a number of resources that are available on their website that explain what psychosis is, what the early signs are, what the type of treatment that you can find at any of these specialty programs, and also how to support a loved one who's experiencing a serious mental illness. So I would strongly encourage NAMI, as well as those other 2 programs that I was talking about. And then Heads Up PA is the state coordinating effort for all of the early intervention programs that are in Pennsylvania. But specifically for youth in general for mental health support, there is also a training program called Youth Mental Health First Aid, which trains young people to be aware of mental health troubles and how to connect with a caring adult who can be supportive of if there's a crisis that's going on. And there are multiple trainers for both the youth version of mental health first aid in Allegheny County, and there's also an adult version of mental health first aid in Allegheny County. The last group that I was aware of that I heard that did a youth mental health first aid training program was the Mentoring Partnership. And I could provide a contact for that if that's something you're interested in.
Yep, thank you. I don't know if anybody else wanted to.
Yeah, real quick. AFSP, we don't have anything specifically to what you're referring to, but I know that they are working at the national level on creating some programs for youth. I know that we do have a generic program that would be for all ages, really. It's called Talk Saves Lives, and it just is a generic discussion about mental health. And it would be applicable to really anybody. We have done some training for bereavement groups, and I know we recently just 2 months ago, I believe, did some training for a bereavement group specifically for the youth. So if they've lost someone to suicide, they would have somebody to go to in a bereavement group rather than adults, where they probably wouldn't open up very much. But among other teens, they probably would. So that's what we have to offer at this point. But I know that they're working on one.
The AFSP, you also have the Seize the Awkward campaign.
The Seize the Awkward campaign is more for the 20, 30-somethings. That basically is about, there's some small little videos that you can stream. A good example would be you're sitting on the couch watching the college football game with your buddy, and you just notice something's not right, and you've been noticing it for a while. So you seize the awkward moment and you ask the question, "Hey, you doing okay? Seems like something's wrong." So that's sort of opening up the conversation of discussion.
There are some fantastic resources on there, everything from, helping your friend through a breakup and like all these specific situations. I was really impressed whenever once I started, because of the projects that we do with schools a lot. I end up, when people do reach out to us and, we're basically we combine art with getting people to talk more about their mental health. And I think people don't know who to reach out to sometimes. And sometimes we get emails asking, like we're a provider, and we do have some therapists that we refer them to. But more often than not, we do try to push them in the way of the AFSP and getting involved. And we were just talking about this, but whether it's a student or an adult, how important it can be for them to just to volunteer with organizations like that, surrounding yourself by people that get it.
We said before, people that get it, surrounding yourself with those kind of people will really get you through a lot of struggles. It really will.
Very quick. Sorry, apologize, just because for youth, I just wanted to shout out quickly because it is in my district, and just since we're talking about this, there is an organization run through the JFCS. It's called Upstreet. It's on 5844 Forward Avenue. It is specifically for young people, like I think 15 to 22 or something like that. They can drop in and get therapy support from like whatever, and they can also chat too. So if they don't feel comfortable dropping in or they're not able to get there, they have in certain hours they can either make an appointment or they can just immediately chat with someone. So Upstreet is a good resource for young people who just don't have any, or just like can't talk to a parent, don't have,
Gwen's Girls also has Caring Connections, where they provide a supportive space, and I believe they also do free connection to therapy for youth as well.
I was just gonna piggyback off your comment about when parents or adults leave the room. Artist Talk had an Artist Talk performance series with teenagers. We partner with WQED's Film Academy. And like I said earlier, our events, artists get up, they share their artwork and they talk about their mental health behind it. But these were like teenagers getting up and being brave and sharing their artwork and talking about how they feel. And I could tell they were holding back a little bit. At the end of our events, we have a therapist facilitate a conversation. We kicked the parents and chaperones out of the room, and these stories and experiences just started pouring out of these teenagers. They were very open. They were ready to be vulnerable, to share, which is really brave to do in front of your peer group in itself, but to speak to a therapist in front of a room and be vocal about things that you're going through and see these teenagers start to, whether they were friends or not, start to relate and resonate with each other was really beautiful. And I think, it doesn't always have to be a program that is out there for teenagers. It's a room that can be created and curated to just talk through things. So that was a really beautiful experience. And it was just me and WQED talking about some of their teens having some issues, and they're all from different schools. It's an after-school program, and how can we bring somebody in to help, because they tried to bring in a therapist and it didn't work. None of them wanted to talk, but when we put them in a room and gave them some snacks and a safe space to talk about what they wanted to express, and it was a matter of me connecting with the Pittsburgh School District. I found a therapist that worked within that district with kids, and we curated the conversation with them. So I think something like that can be just as impactful, and it doesn't always have to be a space, but these community spaces that are being curated and facilitated, I just want to continue to emphasize how powerful they can be.
Just to follow up on your comment too, we were doing an educational program in, I believe it was a grade school, and one of the questions that was asked of the kids is, if you were having, some issues that you wanted to talk to somebody about, who would you talk to first? And we would ask the question, like, to prompt the answers. Your parents. Nobody raised their hand. We didn't expect that, but nobody raised their hand. You asked with their friends, that was where they would go. So, yeah, that was a direct question to them. It's a little stunning. We also did a presentation, another stunning one, was we did it in front of a group of EMTs, where we were going to train them about signs to look for mental health, because they're in people's homes sometimes with those issues right in front of them. That group needed a different discussion because they're traumatized as well, and they're really suffering themselves from having to deal with it every day. So sometimes you don't know what you're going to run up against when you start talking.
I thank you, for that insight. My next question is about caregivers. Again, coming from my personal, lived experience as someone who was, 20 years old, coming home from college and actually beginning my summer internship here at Pittsburgh City Council. I had the unfortunate experience of actually finding my mother sleeping on a park bench in Allegheny Commons Park on the north side. And that began my journey over almost a quarter century of being her primary caretaker. What resources are there out there, for those taking care of someone, with mental illness, understanding through my personal experience how relationships become very strained within the family, and all family members, it does not generally become an all hands on deck situation because of some things that the person who's suffering may do that some family members will never, forgive them for, even though they understand that they do have mental illness. The act still happens, and she was no longer with my father. That relationship had ended. So I really, as the youngest in my family, found myself as a 20-year-old, with this responsibility of having to find my mother housing, having to find her, mental health resources, and basically, having that, responsibility, basically still as a kid, looking back as a 48-year-old, how young I was, thrust, with that responsibility. Now, regardless of, whether you're, 20, 30, 40, or 50, what resources are there out there, for caregivers, who are trying to navigate, the situation where maybe all the family members aren't, involved, in caregiving for one reason or another. It becomes a very much a strain, and some people, just tap out, like, this is just, too much. But I'd be interested to hear, what resources are there out there. I know we've talked a lot about those who are suffering, but those who are, within, that concentric circle, who are, providing that services, and providing, that support, who often find themselves, sometimes often just as alone as the person, at the center, of that circle who needs the most help.
Yeah, I would speak to, we have a men's group that's in collaboration with the Kingsley Association in Larimer, and that men's group has been going on for, 4 years now? About 4 years, and just the relationships that those men have in that group, they're coming and they're sharing a significant amount of the things that they've gone through, and they're asking, does anybody have a resource? Can anybody actually be a resource to me as I'm supporting a mom, a child, multiple children? And they coalesce and wrap around each other in a way that, I had never seen in a men's group before. So I'm just offering that up for anybody who might be listening. There's this men's group that happens 2 Tuesdays a month. Can you keep me honest on this, Court?
Second and fourth Tuesday.
Second and fourth Tuesday in the evening at the Kingsley Association. It has continued to grow, and they go and they talk about family challenges, financial literacy opportunities. They talk about caregiving. They talk about all the things that men need to be able to talk about together that ultimately end up supporting their mental health, and it ends up creating this this peer support group that they have that they may not have with their immediate family. It's not that their family doesn't want to do it, they may not have the capacity or whatever the case may be, but in this group, they have a really, really strong peer support group.
I can add a little bit more, just going back to what I mentioned about NAMI's family support groups before. Like my friend here was talking about before, the importance of having someone who's been there before to be a support and kind of help you along the way. I really love NAMI's family support groups because they are trained family members who have family members with mental illness who are there to support other caregivers. And so that's the entire model, is family members / caregivers being present and supportive of other family members / caregivers. And the most knowledgeable people I know about our entire mental health system are the parents and the family members and the people who are in the home, right? Because they are the ones that are making the phone calls. They are like de facto case managers, for their loved ones. And so I really encourage any family members who are looking for support or connection or someone to help them figure out, like, who do I call? How do I go about this? How do I support my own emotional health while I'm trying to support somebody else? NAMI Family Support Groups is a very special place because, again, it's family members supporting family members. They do the peer support groups too, but I think their bread and butter is really that family support group. They also have a family education program, which is like 12 weeks long, and they cover a different topic every week. It's a free program to help folks get a better understanding of what is mental illness, how can I as a family member support my loved one, and again, just being in community with other folks who are going through similar things. The last thing that I would suggest is that if your loved one is connected to a treatment provider or a program, whatever it is, most of these programs are also openly inviting of family members to participate and to support their loved one because of things like HIPAA, and it's your loved one's treatment. It's their right to decide if they open that room to others. But that's one way that you can be supportive of your loved one, is by asking if you're allowed to be in the room with them and sharing how you can be there to support them if you're in the room and able to, kind of receive the information and help them hold on to it too.
Right.
Two things to add to that. I think you'd be surprised how young kids are that they cannot allow their parents in to the room. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's still 14 in PA. So a 15-year-old that's in therapy, if they don't want their parents in, you can't go in without them signing a waiver. I also wanted to just real quick, we always talk about it this way, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can put the one on next to you. So you have to take care of yourself first, or you can't help your loved ones.
Right. Thank you. My final question is more of a global question about the overall, ecosystem. And I love, the use of that word. I know, we're at a time, where we have, an increase of folks who are unhoused, folks who are dealing with substance abuse issues. And while at the same time, over the last, 20 years, at least from my point of view, I'll lean on, the expertise that's across the table from me. It seems that we've divested, in the ecosystem in some areas. You look at the closure of things like Mayview State Hospital and other parts of the traditional, ecosystem. First part of the question is, do you see a connection in the challenges that we're experiencing now, and the closures of places like Mayview and other traditional institutions that existed for over a century? And do you see a link between the challenges we're facing now and the closure of those facilities, as well as, given that history, what can we do now to strengthen the ecosystem?
I think there's a direct connection and correlation. And I think what is happening is more money is being rerouted back into full circle, these community care interventions that we're talking about. Even thinking about just drop-in places where folks can go and they can just have someone to talk to that may have a certified peer support specialist on staff, someone who has that state certification behind them, and somebody who can relate to their lived experience. There is money that is being reinvested into the community mental health care ecosystem so that we can be able to essentially sort of brace the fall of those folks who will now need our support from those places that were closed.
Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I believe Councilperson Strasburger is still on.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, please know that even though I'm not there in person and I'm not on camera, I've been listening intently since I joined, I think about 20 minutes late. So apologies for missing the first bit, but I've been listening intently and really absorbed by this discussion. So thank you, Councilperson Charlin. Thank you to everyone who's here from your various organizations to speak about this critical issue. I don't think there's too much more that I can ask. I think a lot of the questions I had have been answered. And so I guess I'll say a couple of things. I'll make a comment, and if there's any response to that, that's fine. I've really appreciated the acknowledgement that, what we think about as mental health support traditionally, like one person talking to a trained professional is not the only option, that being in community is sometimes even better, is sometimes even more effective, particularly being in community with those who have had a shared experience, especially if it's a traumatic experience. And, what it makes me think of is this this issue that I'm really glad our Surgeon General has brought attention to, this epidemic of loneliness that we as a society are in the midst of for so many reasons. And, that people can be amongst other people and have lots of friends and still feel very, very lonely. And so I don't know exactly what cities can do to alleviate that. Certainly we've heard today that supporting and turning people, and amplifying the work that groups like yours do, and offering, your organizations as resources and many others. I would venture to guess that, if we can create spaces, like let's just say Shenley Plaza, for instance. It's a space where you can gather in a group, you can gather by yourself. Something as simple as putting a bench or designated as, this is a conversation bench. If you sit here, the person who sits down next to you can have a conversation with you. And then like lounge chairs that allow you to be alone but not lonely. Like just signaling that we kind of understand this issue and this crisis, and that sometimes you can be alone but not lonely, and sometimes you can be amongst people but feeling very lonely. And create third places that foster that kind of connection community. But I don't know if there's anything that that you can think of that we can do along those lines, outside of formal talk groups, talk therapy groups, other strategies that you all have used to help foster that's feeling of connectedness. Because although we're not talking about, this isn't a post agenda on how to live to be 100. As we've said, as we've heard, mental health and health are inextricably linked, and I just really keep coming back to this feeling that there are people in our midst who either, are older and don't leave their house and are feeling very lonely, or are, young people going to school and are feeling very lonely. And if you have any ideas of ways we can continue to support those kinds of efforts, I'm all ears.
This makes me think of the riding the trolley and seeing the signs for suicide prevention. It may be like a message from former President Barack Obama, and it says something about, suicide prevention, and here's a number to call, or here's a website. So when we think about public art or public places where people in our city and in our county frequent consistently, I think those are always great opportunities to get messaging, for lack of a better word, billboards that people are able to see when they're in transit and moving from point A to point B. I know that I pay attention to those, even as a licensed clinical social worker, a therapist, a community mental health executive. I see those signs, and they help me feel better in the moment and give me hope as well. So I think they would do the same for other residents as well.
I would also add that I feel like the 988 hotline needs to be more heavily advertised. There's a lot of schools I go into, and it's maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 students already know about it, let alone knowing that they can actually text with someone. They don't have to make a phone call even, and it can just be that easy. If they're struggling, it's just 988, and they can have a text conversation with a trained professional to help them.
I would agree. I want to piggyback and say that, like, for the last 15 minutes, DARE keeps popping in my head. Drug abuse resistance education. And it's something that I grew up in, a lot of us grew up around, and it just is like, all right, that never left my mind. That's something that stuck, that they came into school and they kept pushing it on us. And I feel like it's something we could kind of recreate in the mental health space with advertising, with public art, with getting into schools and talking to the kids and showing them it's okay. Even in the comment of, not having therapists in the school, trying to alleviate that, creating a safe space like what we do in Artist Talk. There should be a place a kid can go and say, I'm having an issue today. I'm struggling today. I know growing up, I had very few teachers that I would go to speak about something. Like, I definitely wasn't going to my mom or dad, but there was some teachers I would say, you know what, I'm really feeling bad about what just happened or what's going on with me. And those few helped me a lot. So even just to create those, find those teachers. It might not be every teacher, but I'm sure there are teachers who want to learn what we're doing and be able to source children to us, or be able to have an initiative to point them to and say, hey, this is what you should be going through or experiencing to help you with what you're experiencing.
Thank you all so much. Those are great ideas. And I guess the only other thing I'll say is more of a PSA. One is, I know that Representative Dan Miller, whose major issue, or one of his major issues, has been mental health support, and puts on a mental health and disabilities summit every year, is planning on doing another one in April and having it be in the city. So I guess we should all keep an eye out for that and attend and get more resources that we can then share with our community members and constituents and encourage them to go. I know wherever it is, it's going to be on a bus line, and it's going to be, easy to get to. And in addition to what Councilperson Warwick mentioned about the resources for youth in her district, I also wanted to give a great shout out to the 1027 Healing Partnership, based out of the JCC in Squirrel Hill, which is open to anyone. Have a lot of different types of group support, including, walks in the park, forest bathing, drum circles, art therapy, all sorts of different types of ways, and it's open to anyone, not just residents in Squirrel Hill. So anyway, thank you. You're doing the most amazing type of work. I hope that we can establish, and just leading through example, create a culture in the city where mental health support is where mental health is supported, where we're aiming to, in my mind, create the healthiest community in the United States if we can, and a big part of that is mental health. So again, thanks for all you do, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Councilperson Strasburger. Anything else from members? Okay. So I want to close out just a couple things that, as we were all talking through, that were highlighted to me. One thing that was mentioned was the lack of school counselors and how it's not mandated in schools. And when I came into office, I thought it was incredibly important that my predecessor really had no relationship with the school district, that I did tours in all of my schools to kind of understand what was happening there. And I think that's one of the things that has been eye-opening to me, the lack of, in Pittsburgh Public, the lack of support systems with mental health services in the schools, and especially at a very young age, at some of the elementary schools there. And I think that's something that I'm not sure what avenue it looks like that we can help with, but something that has really stuck out to me is something that needs to be, a problem that needs to be solved. I know the district is looking at their whole facility usage plan, and there's lots of thoughts, good and bad, and I'm glad that we don't have to figure that out ourselves. But that's something that I want to see. Is I want to see the elementary schools be big enough that they can have school counselors. But I think another good point there would be finding a way to mandate that, and if not, encourage it, and what we can do as a body here to help fundraise for that, because I think that is, especially at a young age, just so vitally important. I also want to mention I really liked the idea of this crisis care plan. As you're describing it, it sounds almost to me like when I was a kid, and my mom always had the deal that if the house caught on fire, we go and we stand by the mailbox here, and this is the plan in the case of an emergency, and kind of thinking of that, developing that plan for you as an adult with your health, and how valuable that concept is. I'm gonna steal that kind of idea. I think that's exceptional, and I really appreciate you bringing that to me. And the other main takeaway that I have here is we've had a lot of conversations about helping the helpers, and I cannot. It is so true in so many different facets, how we see the helpers as sometimes disposable, and that they're gonna work as hard as they can, and then they'll move on to the next thing. And what we can do to help sustain that and make sure that is not the way that we in this society, in this region, treat people. And on the local level, we deal a lot with homelessness, and my office specifically deals a lot with homelessness. And one of the things that we've learned, and when we talk to people that want to bring in homeless shelters, is essentially, how are you paying your workers? What do off days look like for your workers? Not just what is your budget and how are you going to treat people that come to your facility, but also how do you treat the people that work for you right now? Because if you're paying them minimum wage and asking them to do, unbelievable work that has a lot of baggage associated with it, and they're not able to take care of themselves, they're not going to be here very long, and they're not going to be able to take care of the people that we need them to take care of. And just really how important that is. And I'm glad that we spent the time talking about that. I'm happy to close out unless anyone else has anything that they would like to add. All right. So, I very much appreciate that we were able to do this. I want this to be something that starts a conversation that we can continue having. I think this is a space that the city needs to take ownership of and move into. And I thank you for helping to educate me and my colleagues here, and we will certainly be in touch. So, having exhausted the business of this post agenda, this meeting is adjourned.